We spoke in 2019 around the release of the Banks Vaults collection as well, and we did touch a little bit on your orchestral work, so it's particularly good this time to cover it in more detail.
Sure, that's fine. It's good.
This collects the albums that you've made orchestrally over the last 20 years, so it's five, six, and seven, so everything is packaged in one go.
That's the idea, really. It was, I think, it was just felt that particularly five didn't get a particularly long innings, if you like. So it was just a way of putting them out there again to try and just see if there's any interest and possibilities. Because, I mean, obviously I like them, but people around me was felt that they deserved a bit more of an airing.
This all started with Black Downs. That was one of the first pieces that you did, which is now part of this collection that got you in on this run of albums.
Yes, in many ways. I mean, I'd kind of at the end of after Calling All Stations, the Genesis album we did with Ray Wilson, and it looked like we weren't going to do anything else. I just thought it'd be nice to try and do this, something I thought had in the back of my mind. And I had two or three pieces around that I thought could work orchestrally, but I hadn't really got any real idea how to do it. And it was just sort of sitting around improvising and with a string synthesizer. And I came up with all the parts that ended up in Black Down. And I felt that it was really worth pursuing it because I thought that was really good. So I kind of that's where it was the motive, if you like, for doing the rest of the set.
And was piano the instrument that you learned as a child?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, when I learned it at school. I never found it that easy, really. I'm not very good at sight reading music. I've always found it much easier to play by ear, which is a sort of lazy man's version, way of doing it. And I think when you play by ear, you tend to get into writing because you're working out why people do things and what else you could do and everything. So yes, the piano was the original thing. And I mean, and when I first started in the group playing an organ, I played the organ a bit like a piano initially, and then realized that you could hold your fingers down and it would last a bit longer. And that was a whole new approach.
As a child, did you listen to a lot of classical music, or did you quickly get into early rock and roll?
I think initially the first things I heard tended to be what my mother had, and that included a lot of some classical stuff and show tunes. I found Rodgers and Hammerstein in particular, it was quite an influence on me. And yeah, obviously at school and stuff, you had hymns. I first got into rock and roll about it's 1961. It's a long time ago. I know you were pre your birth and all the rest of it, but I can almost remember the top 10 at the time. It was The Young Ones was number one in the charts. And I loved everything at the time. I really did. And listening to Alan Freeman doing Pick of the Pops, which was the only thing you ever had really in those days, that was just so exciting, really. And I loved Alan Freeman. I thought he was a wonderful DJ, my favorite ever DJ, really, because he made everything sound so exciting, particularly to an 11-year-old. And that sort of, I got really totally absorbed in rock music at that point. And I always liked classical music and I listened to a certain amount, but rock music really took over at that point.
And in terms of classical orchestral work, was it the Wicked Lady soundtrack, which was the first thing that you did that really focused on that side?
It was when I did the music for that film. Really, I did it, really played all the parts on pianos and stuff and played it to Michael Winner and he really liked it. So we got into this arranger, Christopher Palmer, and he made it sound very nice. I mean, I wrote this one theme that I wasn't, it was I liked it. Obviously, it was a good theme, but I think the way he made it when he orchestrated it, it sounded so much better. It just inspired me to think sometime in the future I'd really like to try and do this a bit. And that's really what led. That was many years before. That was back in the, I don't know when it was a long time ago anyhow. And that's so when I got to the end of what looked like the end of Genesis, I thought it would be a nice thing to have a go at and before I gave up.
Because even in your solo work, like on the Banks Statement album, there's Thursday the 12th, which
Mm.
does have, it does start on that path towards more orchestral focused work.
I suppose so. It was a bit of a cheat, really. I mean, I did a sample of a piece of Vaughan Williams' piece and played it backwards, and then started playing lots of notes at the same time, which is like a lot of people do, and it produced this rather sort of haunting sound, which I thought was really nice. So I used that as a background. I'd done this a bit before on the Genesis album. Was it on before or after? I can't remember, but It's Gonna Get Better, which started off with much the same idea. I had a little um, a bit of classical three notes of a cello part actually I played, and by playing lots of notes at the same time, it did all this interweaving that I thought was really attractive. So yeah, I mean those kind of ideas were around. I mean, I love the sound of it, and within Genesis, one of my roles was definitely sort of orchestration, if you like, really. Being a keyboard player, that tended to happen, and it was quite nice when you could pick out parts rather than just playing block chords, of actually playing parts that sort of interwove, which happened on things like Tonight or Blood on the Rooftops, where you could actually do little bits and pieces.
And on your album Six Pieces for Orchestra, there's a few tracks on there like Siren where you do actually have featured soloists.
Yes, I wanted to do that. And the first one, I hadn't really done that. And then I had a couple of sort of things around that I thought would, which I started to write. And I thought it'd be really nice to have a featured soloist. Originally, I had the sax was the first idea I had. And then I had this other piece, and I thought, which I had a piece I was improvising on top of it, like with a keyboard, so with a string sort of violin-y sound, and it started to sound quite good. So I thought it'd be really nice to do that. Obviously, I think people find it easier to follow sometimes pieces which are led by an instrument like that, particularly if they're coming from the sort of more, if you like, the more pop world, and you sort of know what you're supposed to be listening to, which is quite good, I think. And yeah, I was very pleased. I think particularly Blade, the one with the violin line led piece, was probably the standout track on that particular record, but that's just for me.
I think you said at the start about the Five album is that it does contain some of your best work, whether it's your traditional solo work or work in Genesis, like Prelude to a Million Years. It's got material on there you can be rightly proud of.
Well, I'm obviously I like it. I mean, it's just, I think like many people, you always the things you've done most recently, but I just felt that I sort of had cracked it with that one a little bit. I mean, I originally wrote it as a piece. I was commissioned to do a piece for the Cheltenham Music Festival, and that was sort of what I did, although I've adapted it a bit for the record. Um, I just love the way you can going through all the different movements and stuff, and trying to keep that. It was originally called arpeggi because it had this arpeggio part that went all the way through it all the time. And I really liked that, which is something I'd tried to do on the previous record, but the kind of arrangers didn't really want me to do that. So I got talked out of it slightly. But on this one, I decided would just go for it. So you've got a kind of constant pulse going through it. Because I come from that kind of world, I suppose I'm used to drums and things doing that. And I think it works. So I was happy with it.
Are we still working with orchestras on the continent? Because I know at one time you were working with is it the Prague Orchestra.
I did the second two records I did with Prague orchestras, two different ones actually. I did the first one originally with the London Philharmonic, and although it ended up being fine, it took quite a bit of effort to get there. And but you really have no time for rehearsal or anything, so it was just because the cost of studio time and everything. Whereas in Prague, the whole thing is much more laid back, and I had a lot of time to rehearse, and an audience and also an orchestra that I have to say was more enthusiastic about what I was trying to do, included Genesis fans and everything in there. And it was both of those records were very pleasurable to make, whereas the first one was a little bit of a sweat.
And do you have plans for any more orchestral records?
Not specifically, but I don't know. I can't stop myself putting things together. So, who knows if I live long enough, something else may come out like that. But I've not particularly got anything in mind at the moment.
And do you think that there's something particularly about progressive music in general, in terms of the length, the shifts in sound, bringing different instruments that can give you a great platform for working on orchestral pieces later?
Well, I think for me, it's certainly that case. Genesis, particularly early days, but even to some extent, some of the later days, we kind of let ourselves breathe quite a bit and did quite long pieces that went different directions and stuff. And I mean, I was very much the motivator, I felt, of all that kind of thing. I liked that. I like the chance to develop ideas and use, I like chords. I like to use, not for the sake of it, but I like using sequences and combinations that haven't been used before so often anyhow. And you're given that scope with an orchestra. Strange sequences don't sound quite as strange when you're using an orchestra in a way. And I just felt that was something I really wanted to explore. Felt I hadn't got to be tied down, didn't have to have quite so much repetition. And when I went back to a piece, I could do it a different way each time, a little bit and add a little bit here and there. It's just sort of thing I like to do, I suppose. It means that sometimes it's for people literally listening, maybe it's a bit confusing, but that's a lot of orchestral music is like that. It takes more than one go to appreciate, I think.
And there are certain pieces of your work that weren't originally purely orchestral, like Firth the Fifth, that have actually been recorded in a more classical setting. Have you heard those interpretations of that, and
I
what do
can't
you
say I
think?
have actually. No, I've heard various people attempting the introduction. It's a bit of a party piece for a lot of people. I think that they always play it too fast. That's the only thing. But it's good they can play it because I probably can't play it anymore. I can't remember. But it's yeah. I mean, it's a naturally fairly orchestral sort of piece. I think it's got the nature of the kind of way the chords go and everything like that, and the guitar solo has it could obviously could sound good on lots of other instruments, particularly violins and stuff. So I haven't actually heard it. No, I haven't heard versions. People send me things sometimes of things that have been done, but I haven't actually come across that.
It works very well.
Is it?
In terms of that, do you remember getting the piano motif for Firth the Fifth?
Well, it developed a little bit. Really, when we were doing Foxtrot, I had this sort of idea that for something which started off, and it didn't really develop at the time with Genesis. It was much straighter. It was very much in 4/4 and just did it. And I don't know. I can't really remember. I was just fiddling around one day, and it sort of that first little bit came to me, and it sort of didn't stick to a particular time signature, but it seemed to work. You didn't. It wasn't awkward at all. So I just thought this is quite fun, playing with doublets and triplets and quadruplets, whatever they're called, I don't know, and letting them run just do what I wanted rather than worrying too much whether I was actually in time. I'm not a great timekeeper anyhow, and just doing it so that you just do what came naturally to me seemed to work rather well, and I just developed the idea, and that's how it happened. I can't honestly remember the moment. It did develop over a bit of time, but once I got that first bit, I think it came quite quickly.
Been reading that there's a new or remixed version of the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Is that correct?
There's some possibility. Yeah, Peter and I were talking about it actually yesterday. There's this new atmosphere mix. I don't know. It's like a new surround sound thing, I think. We did when we redid the with Nick Davison, we redid the mixes back in 2007 or something. They were primarily done for surround sound, although the stereos obviously have survived. The whole surround idea seems to have a little bit gone AWOL, I think. Atmos, maybe it's a new version which will produce another result. And the idea was perhaps to try another mix again. I don't know, with a new set of people doing it. I think Peter's quite keen on that. And I have no problem with that as long as it sounds good. It's difficult to know really because I liked the way it sounded before, particularly the version we did 2007, which was just an enhanced version of what we did originally. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But I mean, we're going to have a bit of a go at it and try. We've done a couple of pieces that sound okay, and then we'll try some of the others and see where it's going. The music is now owned by Concord, and they are quite keen, I think, to have something slightly different to go in a package, a 50th anniversary. That makes me feel old, by the way. 50 years since over 50 years since the Lamb Lies Down. I mean, it still seems like yesterday, but anyhow, so that is a possibility, which would be quite fun, I think, if it works out.
That album, I think, featured some of the last material that you jointly worked on with Peter. So it was a bit of a thread of the previous.
Yeah, I feel that we see a lot of the stuff we wrote was writing as a group and bits and pieces ended up. But I often just say that the Lamazan itself, the opening track, was probably the last thing that Peter and I wrote together, with just the two of us, without anybody else, if you like. And I'm pretty proud of that as well. But most of the other tracks on there have an involvement from everybody a bit here and there. Obviously, Peter wrote the lyrics, but beyond that, the music was very much came from every source in a way. And and a lot of pieces that I was quite proud of. But sometimes when they're fitting into I mean, I always have slightly ambivalent feelings about that record, just because things like the Lamia and the Colony of Slippermen, which was bits I'd written pretty much on my own, but the lyrics ended up making them a certain kind of thing. Lamia could have been a very romantic piece, and Slipperman could have been. It's sort of on stage he was wearing a funny costume and you couldn't really sing with that on. So that's my feelings about it. I think the thing it's still fun. It's a lot of excitement, but perhaps you could have got something more out of the record. And I never felt that it quite peaked. I never felt the final side did the thing. The first couple of sides I think are great, but it would have been nice to have had it to have been as good all the way through, I thought.
How do you look back on the very earliest Genesis material, even some of the early demos? Can you see the evolution of your songwriting, whether it's with Peter or with the rest of the group and yourself?
I listened to, I think Esoteric have got some plans to put some stuff out, and I've heard a few new sort of mixes of some of those tracks too. No, I'm quite proud of some of them. I think they sound very good. It was kind of, we were young, naive, finding out things for the first time, you know. Um, and some of those bits and pieces, things you would perhaps might shy away from now, but for example, I mean, The Conqueror, which I think seems to be quite popular for outside the group and stuff, that little riff that I play all the way through, you know, it was just the first time I'd ever really tried using different bass notes on the same chords, and it works so well. And there's something about that is very attractive, and I can't do that couldn't do that for the next 50 years if you like, but at the time it was good, and I think that particular track and some of the others sound good, you know. Peter's voice always sounds great, and I'm coming back to it. I'm amazed. I always knew it was good, but hearing it, he was really good, you know. And the rest of us were okay, and it worked. The resultant album, Genesis Revelation, I think we were lucky it wasn't a hit, because I think Silent Sun could have been a hit. Listening to it now, it sounds like it was a hit, but it wasn't. It's got the sort of the string sounds from the period, and there's a catchy melody and everything. I think if it had been successful, it would have gone probably off the rails, really. We're only 17 or 18. It would have been strange, really, to have done that. So it was a kind of bonus that it didn't do well. And it took us another 10 years before we came close to having a hit record. And that was probably just as well. It gave us time to develop and to do these kind of quite experimental pieces back in the early 70s.
Yeah, because material like the knife from Trespass is quite a contrast to what you were doing just a few years early, kind of Bee Gees type numbers. Things significantly shifted.
Yeah, well, I think by the time we'd listened to it to other people, both Peter and I, which we wrote what you might call the verse part of the knife together. Well, it was a sort of part of one of the songs we sort of wrote during that period. I think we'd seen the nice and liked that, and that bouncy sort of rhythm was part of a bit like the rondo the nice did at the time and things. So, you know, we were influenced by whatever we heard. And we were trying to go a little bit further, but the development of the knife, the sort of second half, if you like, was something we very much did as a group when we were rehearsing. And we got into this thing where we were trying to do sort of like, you know, just go a little bit further. We were influenced by groups at the time, like, and family and people, and obviously latterly the King Crimson. And it gave you an opportunity. We felt you could go a bit further and not stick to the pop format and see where it went, really. And back in the early 70s, there were a lot of clubs around the country that were quite keen to hear stuff that wasn't totally straightforward. And we developed quite a loyal, but a very small but loyal following back in those years. And that kind of gave us confidence, you know.
By the time of Nursery Crime, you still had that melodic and softer sensibility like Seven Stones. So you were able to kind of do those different shades for the material that was more innovative and then for material that was a bit more pastoral.
I don't think we really thought of it like that. It's just we put together what we had written as individuals, combined it, wrote some stuff on the spot as well, and just developed the ideas. And some things developed more than others. They became big things and some things stayed small things. No particular reason, I don't think. I mean, Seven Stones was just ended up being quite a highly arranged sort of song, verse chorus type thing. Whereas obviously the musical box went through all the different sort of passages. And I think we preferred that kind of thing. That, and I suppose, I don't know, Salmasis and Hogweed were all that kind of thing where we started with one idea and developed it and allowed ourselves to do other things. And it was great fun to do that, really, and to not be stuck in verse chorus format, right? We liked that as well. And we tried to do that. Over the years, we always tried to do that, but never were very successful. Seven Stones was actually an attempt at a hit single. Well, you know, it's about as far from hit singles as you could imagine, but we sort of quite wanted that. But we had the little song called Happy the Man, which we put out at the same sort of time as all that, which was a, you know, simpler song because we liked that. We really like doing simple things, but we wanted to do both, really.
And what about influences for some of your lyrics? A Trick of the Tail, was that related to William Golding in terms of an inspiration for you?
I've always said that. The only aspect of it that is what I liked about the William Golding book called The Inheritors, which is written from, most of the book is written from the point of view of one of the, a certain side, the Neanderthals, I suppose they were. And then the final chapter is written, or maybe I can't remember, it's a chapter or more, is looked at from the other point of view, so that the people looking on, seeing these people or whatever your beings, in a totally different light. And so I just like that idea where the first part of the song was all very much about the chap himself, who was a kind of, okay, he had horns and a tail, which made him different from what we are. And then the final part obviously deals with looking at it, him as an outsider. And that's sort of insider outsider thing is part of what appealed to me really as a simple song, the one I'd written many years earlier, actually, music of that. And I just had this idea, I thought that'd be quite nice. The idea that a different being like that would be treated we wouldn't treat them very well, is the point.
When you were down to a trio by the late 70s, did that make things easier in a way because you had less people contributing ideas, so you were able to pare things back?
I think so. I think it was, in some ways, it was, in terms of writing, it was easier. We could include more of our material. I think the first one we did, and then there were three, was a little bit, Phil was perhaps not quite so involved in that record in some ways. Obviously, he was a singer, and we did, Mike and I tend to be mainly songs that Mike and I had written independently, really, in many ways. And I think, but the best things on it were probably the combined things that we did. Well, particularly Follow You, Follow Me, which was something that Mike had a riff, and then I started playing chords to it, and then all the rest of it. So it's became I think we really felt that the combined thing was actually probably our real strength. And particularly since just before that, and obviously after that, we started doing solo albums, it gave us an opportunity to do things, our independent stuff, add a voice, if you like. And so we felt that we'd try and keep Genesis as much as possible for doing things where we did things together. And because of the nature of the instruments we had, we could do that because Phil would play drums and could sing, and obviously Mike played guitars and bass guitars, and I played the keyboard. So you could improvise and ideas would come. It was quite exciting, really, because sometimes you're just playing along and something would emerge. If one person's having a good day, it could carry the whole thing as well. And Mike was always quite good at picking out and saying, what did you just play? Fortunately, we had tapes. So I didn't have to try and remember it. And you'd hear a little chord sequence and stuff, and suddenly it worked. And then a combination with a little vocal thing that Phil did, like No Son of Mine. Yes, there's simple chords at the front, but then Phil did this little melody line on it at the same time as I was playing the chords. And we had a song going. And I really liked that approach, really. It produced a slightly simpler result, but it was more inspirational in some ways. And it didn't, you weren't, I mean, I enjoy working for years and years on a song as well. I enjoy that as well. But these things were slightly more spontaneous, were great.
Is Down and Out an example of that spontaneity? Because it sounds like it is, but you'll have to.
I just think we were just playing along. Mike did this thing. We ended up in a 5/4 or strange time signature or anything. So I just started banging out these chords on top. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I think we liked over the years, because you can get very stuck in always writing in 4/4 and 3/4, as most modern pop music will tell you. Just occasionally it's nice to try and branch out. And we'd written quite successfully, I think, in 7/8 when we did the cinema show, particularly, and also Dance on a Volcano and things like that. When you write in a different time signature, it makes you do different things. I'd done some fiendish ones in the past with the Robbery, Assault and Battery, the solo in the middle of that, which was bars of 7 followed by a bar of 6, which some strange drum riff that Phil had come up with. So I had to write a solo on top of that, but I quite enjoyed doing that. But it was a very contrived thing. You couldn't just improvise. You had to sort of really work at it. So I think, and Down and Out was an example of that again, when you had a slightly different time signature and you had to write something on it, and it makes, it was okay. It's not my favorite track. It was okay. It was all right.
Because even some of the material that you did with Genesis in the 80s, which sounds simple, but it was more complex than you think. It was more difficult to play.
Well, sometimes the worst song for me playing on stage was Man on the Corner, which sounds deceptively simple, but it was a song of Phil's, this, and trying to work out where the first beat of the bar was the problem. And Chester and Mike had their own way of counting this, which was, Mike's was always a bit strange. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. Chester was 1, 2, 3, 4, but he had the start of the bar in a different place. I was the only person who had to know where the first beat of the bar was, because when it changed to the second bit, I had to come in on the nose, on the beat. And well, we had many exciting moments on stage with that one, not coming on thing. Once the drums came in, it was like such a relief. I could then play properly. But it was, and of course, in modern times now, one would probably have the beat in one's ears or something, but I can't. Back in those days, you had to actually try and remember it. Most of the time it was all right, but it was quite a sweat to actually get it right. But that was just a timing thing, really. And obviously, it wasn't technically difficult to play beyond that. There's always been a few moments on stage that have been bits you build up to, and sometimes you get them right, and sometimes you don't.
I've read that it took you were working on one for the Vine for over a year. Is that one of the pieces that you spent the most time on in terms of refining it?
I say I wrote to that. I mean, it developed over a period of about 9 months, when I was sort of at home, just writing stuff. I contrasted it with Afterglow, which pretty much uh, came out in one go, almost lots of lyrics as well at the same time. Um, and those were two songs I wrote during that period. And I just worked on One for the Vine a bit more. Yeah, I had a sort of, there was quite a lot of different ideas in that. I liked the idea of a little motif that repeated and then going different directions each time. So, and the nature of the story is quite cyclic. And when you return to the original theme, you're back where you started, but as a different person, which is quite appealed to me. So, I mean, you're trying to do something a little bit different there. And whereas with some songs, you're not, you're just trying to write a simple thing and it works like that too.
And then finally, when I look at your work, there is one song that I think is a B-side, but is very well loved by fans of Genesis, and that's Evidence of Autumn.
Yeah, well, I would have had it on the album, obviously, but I'd already got Cul-de-sac on the album, and it was a question of toss up between the two. And I thought at the time I felt Cul-de-sac, but I'm not sure Evidence of Autumn isn't a better song. I think we were at that point we were putting on two or three songs as individuals on that, as well as the group tracks. And so something had to give way. Yeah, I don't really like Evidence of Autumn. I mean, I just, it's one I come back to a lot when I sort of occasionally listen to it, actually, even particularly like the middle. It's a very evocative piece about sort of how things were, if you like. I mean, I write a lot of these songs where lyrically, which are sort of have a degree of finality about them. And perhaps the best known of them would be Fading Lights, where I'm writing very much there about the end of, I thought it might be the last record we'd do with Phil as well. So that was a bit in my mind, and just about how life is, how you look back, and how you might have done some things differently, and how you're going to miss a lot of things as well. And I've done it a few times. I did it with The Final Curtain on one of my solo albums, I think, and probably Afterglow a little bit too. So it's a recurrent sort of thing for me. But I like it. Just I think I write sometimes quite nostalgic sort of sounding pieces, and a nostalgic lyric to go with it, if you can really enhance that, I think.
It also comes out in some of your orchestral work, Autumn Sonata.
Yeah, well, I think in all of them a bit. I just, there's a sort of yearning quality that in some of these things, which I really like. The nature of certain chord combinations, if you like. I mean, some composers like Rachmaninoff has constantly got that yearning quality about it, which makes him so appealing, I think, to a lot of people. And I like to get a bit of that sometimes, and sometimes you get it on one piece and on another. I think I don't do it that consciously. It's just sort of it's what comes out of me, really. That's what inspires me, what sends a shiver down my spine, and I try and sort of hope it transfers to other people.
Thank you, Tony. I really enjoyed listening to the 18 Pieces for Orchestra set, and I hopefully will hear more from you on that.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot.